So last year, 6.5 million total sales of homes. 1 million were new construction, and then the remainder were resales. And if you look at institutional, total what's deemed institutional buying was 100,000 homes net purchased. And so when you look at that, it's really 1.5% of all home sales. And so I think, the conversation is, while you might have, certain neighborhoods or certain markets where, that number may skew higher, overall, it's really only about 1.5%. And so does the narrative of like, Wall Street buying up Main Street, does that really apply was a question.
We're going to get started. So everybody listen, Thad and I are here in Washington, D.C. And but before we get started, the agenda for today, we want this to be open format, dialogue, conversation. We'd love to hear from many voices. We do have our notes, which both of us were taking in review. I mean, this just ended hours ago. So we've got
off the press.
Our notes are like on pieces of paper over here, and we were just reviewing and getting a little organized before we get started here. But we want this to be interactive. There's dialogue. There's things you guys could share to really go deeper on some of this stuff or add perspective to what we're going to offer and report back here. So here's what we're going to do to get kicked off. I just want to explain the conference we were at and who was at this conference as just a point of context. And then we'll dive right into a little bit of some interesting things that we heard. So again, in Washington, D.C., we were in our purple suits, not just our purple T-shirts. And we were with the National Rental Home Council. Second Nature has been an advisory member and a preferred partner of the NRHC for a few years. And the NRHC is really a advocacy group for single family rental and small multifamily rental housing providers. They, a lot of the members are frankly, people like Invitation Homes, American Homes Front, a lot of the large housing operators. There's also a number of service providers that are a part of this as well, but it's open to smaller owner operators, and there are some third-party property managers in addition to that who are members of the group, although NARPM would be the primary organization for most people like that. Many of you joining, you're more familiar with NARPM. And so there was about 400 people, I want to say.
Yep.
Is that right? Okay. So about 400 people in attendance. It was the first in-person event like this for the NRHC. Definitely went great. I would just say, generally speaking, it felt like a great conference, a lot of great content, some good networking as well. And although I will say the parties were not as good as other events that we've been to, maybe Second Nature will have to bring that next. I was in bed like by 10:30 a couple nights. So I'm like, maybe we can step up the after hours fun a little bit more, but certainly during business hours, it was very valuable. So Thad, I think we should kick off with a little bit of, we heard from the CEOs of Invitation Homes, Dallas Tanner, Dave Singelin from American Homes for Rent. We had Kevin Baldridge, COO at Tricon American Homes. We had Colleen Keating, who's the CEO at Firsky Homes. And ultimately, she's the, I don't know if it's executive director or president of NRHC.
Yeah, I believe she's the chairman right now. So
okay. So chairperson of the NRHC, Colleen Keating, CEO at Firsky Homes. And we also had Dana Sprong. He's a Harvard grad and lacrosse player. I've gotten to know Dana a little bit. He's one of the managing partners at Vinebrook Homes, who operates out of the Midwest. And so they were asking some of these CEOs who all manage 10,000 to 80,000 plus homes, views about what's going on in the market, what's important to pay attention to, what are just some of the narratives around the industry, any critical trends or insights. And I'm going to pull up my notes, but maybe you can start us off, Thad, with what stuck out to you from that session.
Yeah, so if I were to cover kind of the high level narrative, I would say, a lot of conversation around, headlines, and with housing prices rising aggressively, what's some of the focus and kind of the magnifying glass that's been put on the single family rental industry, and specifically given a lot of these are institutional investors, what's the focus on the institutional, are they net positive or are they net, negative? And so, some of the headlines obviously are promoting the benefits of professionalization, the good quality product that they're bringing to the market, the things they can do through scale that may not be available to, an individual landlord. But, on the other hand, people may be highlighting, hey, they're buying up a lot of new homes, or they're buying homes in neighborhoods and driving housing prices up. And so a lot of the conversation was around kind of that narrative, that headline, and what are things that, from a PR and communication standpoint, that they can do to better promote the good things they're doing, and then also tactically, what reflection, kind of what do they have to look in the mirror and say things we can do better. So that was a lot of the conversation. I would say a big topic for them, and when they say, all right, what are some solves we can do, is really looking at, focus on resident experience was a big topic, focus on ESG, and like, what are the environmental or, social things that they can be doing. And then, there's a lot of metrics that they walk through to really put things in perspective. So, one interesting thing I'll share there is, so last year, 6.5 million total sales of homes. 1 million were new construction, and then the remainder were resales. And if you look at institutional, total what's deemed institutional buying was 100,000 homes net purchased. And so when you look at that, it's really 1.5% of all home sales. And so I think, the conversation is, while you might have, certain neighborhoods or certain markets where, that number may skew higher, overall, it's really only about 1.5%. And so does the narrative of like, Wall Street buying up Main Street, does that really apply was a question. And so I think that was, some of the conversation. In terms of resident experience, if you look at kind of the institutional, they've spent the last 10 years, really just kind of accumulating, getting operations, getting best practices in place. And so they're now saying, hey, how can we kind of turn the focus to really focusing on that rental experience? What can we do to make it an amazing experience where, the word of mouth, the product is so good that it speaks for itself. So anyway, those were kind of how I'd summarize that. But anything you want to highlight, Andrew?
I just want to hit people with some interesting stats that I wrote down that maybe go a little bit deeper on what you said there. So undersupply is the issue and has been a top issue. And I just want to put some context into that of, if you look at, like population growth is actually kind of softening, across the United States. And there's maybe some challenges and concerns with that. But really what drives rental demand is household formation, which is of population growth, right? Like who's aging into or getting to those life events that are going to move them into, either wanting to buy a home or move into a single family rental out of whatever type of housing class they are. So it's 1.7 to 1.9 million household formations per year. We got this from people like John Burns, and again, some of the CEOs, on the panel. There's only 1 million homes being completions per year. So you've got a 1.7 million in household formation and 1 million completions, right? And this has been happening over the last few years. They're calling about a 4.5 million home deficit, and it's not going to get better over the next year or two. Dramatically is basically the outlook of that, and so demand for rental looks like it's going to continue to be strong. Some of the larger operators, we're looking at some of their demand statistics, 3.5 qualified applications per property, right? So there is a lot of demand. It's higher than pre-pandemic demand. So not just, the temporary things of pandemic, the pandemic factors happening there. That was a key thing. And then another one was also just like the number of rental households and the opportunity for rentals in general. I wanted to transition to that. 49 million households that rent in the United States, 125 million people. And, a lot of what the media is talking about is certainly talking about like home buyers, right? And first-time home buyers. But there's 125 million Americans, right, that are in families that are ultimately renting. And, there's not as much coverage and talk and focus really on them. And so the NRHC is hopefully going to try to bring more attention to that. And that's a point they're taking away.
Andrew, we did get one question from Claire. Well, which net number are you referring to, Claire?
The total number of increase that you said in home formation, I think was the word you used. Is that a net number? There's got to be some that also leave them.
Correct. Yeah. So just based on net household formation, meaning, if people are living longer, I guess, and some of the other things on the other side of those trends that would move people out of the housing market. Basically it's 1.7. You've got this large demographic, specifically of millennials, right? That's just aging into that stage of life where they're getting into home buying. That's driving a lot of the demand, which has driven prices like crazy. Everything that we're seeing on both sides of the housing market, but for sale and for rent. That's a lot of what's driving it, is that just tremendous demand outpacing supply in household formation versus building completion of housing units. So 1 million being completed per year, 1.7 to 1.9 in formation, which hopefully is a stat you can take to some of your investors and property owners of just talking about, here's the outlook, in the years ahead and what's going on. Let's see, what else do I have here? 90% of homes have multiple occupants in SFR. Originally, we'd seen that number be 82. And so that number has ticked up a little bit over time. So 90% of homes, at least first key homes in their portfolio, have multiple occupants. And then also putting some of this rent growth in context of, thinking about things from a triple win lens, so to speak, here, of like rent growth is one way to look at it, right? And if you're the resident, right, that's a cost increase. That's not so as positive a thing, right, from their standpoint and from where they sit. And starting to position these things, it got us thinking about even renewal offers and putting some of these things in context for residents over time. I'm just thinking about communicating to a resident, hey, with what has happened in the mortgage to rent, kind of ratio, there was a 20% difference there. If you look back a few months ago, between that and if you look today with where mortgage rates are, where price appreciation, everything else has gone, that's expanded to close to 40%. And so, when home prices are appreciating 19% year over year, suddenly that 12% rent growth increase or a renewal increase of 8% or something like that, in that kind of context, it's driving more affordability, right? It's giving more access to family. And I think everyone is expecting to see, with mortgage rates going where they are, and it looks like the Fed is just going to continue to increase rates based on what everyone can tell. We're just expecting things to get harder and harder and harder to be accessible to buy a home and move into a home or stay in a home that maybe they could afford and locked. If they didn't get that fixed rate, then it could be more challenging and drive more rental demand there.
Andrew, one thing I was going to follow up on, and we heard a lot of conversation around this. Let's say you do have some rent increases and you're in conversation with residents, and that framing that Andrew was just talking about. One interesting thing, if we see rates rise, let's say another 2 points, I think the rough math is just the roughly 2% increase we've seen in mortgage rates has driven the cost of a mortgage up almost 33%, even though the home prices may not have gone up that much. But, rent prices aren't going up 33%. So the relative cost to buy and that monthly payment, if we see rates continue to go up another 0.2 points, you're going to see that rise even more. So we might have seen a scenario where, a home that cost, $300,000 might have been a $1,600 monthly payment. Now is a $2,400 monthly payment. But a home that was that price to rent might have gone from $1,600 to, $1,700 or something in that neighborhood, right? And so these are just things as you're, thinking about promoting, maybe not the best word, but as you're rolling out potential increases and sharing stuff like that, how can you really frame this? And that is a win to the resident, right? Hey, we're not raising the cost at the same rate that the effective price for a new investor to get in the game would be. You do get some value for being in already. Another thing, jumping into kind of, obviously there's a ton of conversation around interest rates and the economic situation. One stat that was really interesting, and I didn't know this when they'd shared it, is if you look at the last 6 recessions the country's gone through, minus the financial crisis in 2008. So of the last 6, 5 out of the last 6, housing prices did not drop, stayed relatively flat or held was kind of the what was shared. And so what's interesting there, obviously 08 was a unique situation that led to that. We don't have the same situation, driving this. And so the belief there was that, based on the history, that there's a high probability that housing prices do hold. One other factor that plays into that is, in no recession in the past have you had $50 billion of outstanding commitments to build and buy single family homes. And right now that's the rough industry estimate is there's about 50 billion right now that's sitting there trying to buy new homes. And so we're looking at kind of almost a support level where if you do see retail demand drop, that the institutions will continue to buy. So, should there be an economic downturn that continues, we go into a full recession, they do believe home prices will hold just from, past precedent, and that the buying will actually potentially prop up and kind of help there as well. So again, I think, as Andrew highlighted, this is the, if you're doing your quarterly investor calls, I think this is, some great information, hearing from people who have, dedicated full teams to researching and kind of putting this together. So
while you're looking at that too, I was just going to put a couple of things that from an advocacy standpoint, NRHC is looking at. So a big one is HOAs and just the increasing boldness, I guess we'll call it, of HOAs to have discriminatory practice towards renters. It is a little unbelievable, to say we live in America and a group of people can point to another group of people and say, we don't want you to live here. That's something that I think everybody in the room felt this really shouldn't be this way. And so they are going to be passionately advocating for just looking at how we solve this problem with HOAs. And I know many of you encounter the challenges ultimately of working in HOAs, and there can be ultimately these kind of issues where suddenly non-owner occupied homes are being allowed and there's a resident in place. I mean, you essentially have a forced eviction taking place. I mean, it's just a bad situation that can be caused and ultimately impacting investors' ability to rent that asset and allow affordability, allow these families access to school zones, more affordable housing, flexibility, et cetera, that housing choice, right, of being able to rent. And generally, professional operators want the same things as HOAs, like professionally maintained homes, like well-maintained, taken care of, et cetera. And there are HOA violations, and sometimes residents aren't always taking care of the lawn or things like that as they should. But there's been challenges with ultimately HOA attorneys who are a bit opportunistic, I guess is what we could call, and what you'd say is a couple $100 violation or something like that, more of a nuisance fee. Suddenly it's turning into a $10,000 type of lawsuit and legal expense. And it just becomes really prohibitive and a real disincentive for investors to be able to invest in these type of homes. And so that's something they're focusing on.
Matt, I saw your comment. Yeah, it's pretty, that seems very self-serving. Another big thing they were talking about was ESG. And obviously, again, this is, they're very much at the macro level here. So they're really looking into trying to pull data around, because the way we operate our homes, driving in, energy efficiency through various programs they're doing, how can we aggregate those numbers and say, here's an impact we're having that maybe an accidental landlord, their reality is they're not really doing anything, right? They're just kind of handing the key over. So here's the stuff we're doing that's good for the environment. On the social side, here's stuff we're doing. They're talking about how, a lot of them are deploying and, getting rental reporting, how we're creating new credit scores for people. They're talking about some of the buying assistance programs, the financial literacy. Can't talk today. But anyway, so a lot of stuff that they're starting to say, hey, here's the value we bring. And so I think, we can expect to see more of that. And then build to rent. I know a few of you, on this call, have done some build to rent stuff. And so that, that's a big piece. I think AMH put out 2,200 homes this last year. And so, definitely something, it's a big trend. They're typically doing 100, 150 home communities. They're single family homes, obviously, but, there's some small multifamily kind of strategy to how they manage them, consistent appliances, things like that. So they're really talking about, that's a big thing they're promoting is like, hey, we're actually adding to the housing stock versus, just acquiring. So, but I think,
Yep. Yeah, American Host Rent is now the 41st largest home builder in the nation, which is crazy to think about. They were not even a company but a decade ago. So there are a lot of them focusing more and more on developing land and build to rent.
And on that note, one thing we were hearing from them is home builders right now obviously have a lot of demand from retail, but just like they're willing to buy homes off the market, if the market softens, they're also ready and waiting that, if you see, if home building softens, they feel like they can be a really good partner to the home builders. And to an extent, prop up that industry should you see a slowdown. And the big win there that they're promoting is, it takes a while to ramp up home building supply, but then, when it falls down, you can't really turn it on and off like a faucet. So, if you see a drop in retail, but the rental can step in and keep them going, you could see a steadier supply of homes and better solution to kind of close that gap. I think the last thing I had in my notes was there was some conversation around, housing supply that, in the event of an actual recession, if you had 2 to 3% of people said, you know what, I'm going to, have my parents move in with me, or I'm going to move in with my parents, or, hey, I'm going to get a roommate, you actually start, you almost significantly close that gap. And so, depending on consumer spending behavior, that could be one, I don't know if you call it a headwind or a tailwind, I guess depends on your viewpoint, but that could be one thing that impacts, supply demand, and could be a little bit of a curveball potentially that's hard to forecast. How consumers will behave. Culturally, we're typically very much wanting their own space. So do you see that change just on the fringes, but can really, really add up? So
I think the last thing I had down that's really telling you what you already know, because you're experiencing it on a day-to-day basis, is just costs are going up, cost of capital, but also cost of labor, and just how difficult it is to find, maintenance and contract labor, construction labor, rehab labor, et cetera, that gets quality jobs done in a timely manner. It's getting increasingly difficult. Those costs are going up, and cost of materials and supply chain is still a challenge. I don't know how closely you're paying attention to the news, but recently still in China, there's been some shutdowns and like kind of other waves and things like that. And we won't really see the full impact of that until, even a few months from now. But there are some things that have improved. I heard this morning, that refrigerators at one point were 33 weeks. That was the timeline to wait. And those are down to closer to 3 weeks. A couple of years ago, it was like 1 day, or a couple of days. But anyway, so garage doors, windows. I mean, there's different parts of the supply chain that are, going to be interesting to keep an eye on and just see, what potentially to look at, what expectations ultimately to set for people. It's lumber obviously has normalized a little bit down from its big peak, but it's still increased over where it was not too long ago. So the other thing I had down here, Thad, was we were listening to John Hope Ryan in another panel. And there's just a point of insight or something that he said that was interesting, which was that SFR, it's the only emotional asset in real estate. And he talked about how when he was growing up in Compton, California, where he grew up, and for him, home, it was, it's like when you guys are at move out, you see like these marks on the door frame, right? Where someone's like measuring the height of their kid, right? And then you can see like their kid's grown 4, 5, 6 inches over their stay in the home that you manage. How for him and his neighborhood, that home was dignity, it was respect, it was protection, and how much it just meant to him. And there's something really purposeful about that I think we felt, and the whole room felt, a lot of inspiration in, of the very noble work that you all do to provide this place for people. And of course, the challenge that's wrapped into that of it is so emotional that it becomes so difficult, right? When things go wrong. And that's where it's hitting people. It's hitting people, where it's very personal, right, to them. It's very emotional for them. And again, this is what you experience on a daily basis, but I just thought that was a interesting insight in the way that he shared it was important. There's some interesting investor activities around like savings programs. There was one who got on stage that has thousands of homes, mentioning a 2-to-1 kind of savings match for their residents. And so if the resident saves $50, they will actually match that for $50. And they are an owner operator, right? So they're kind of like on both sides of that versus third party and talking about how to fund that. There's questions about how this could be duplicatable, but it was interesting to see how, hey, here's what we did for credit scores over the tenant's residency, but here's also what we did for their savings balances, right? Over their time with us. And saving for a down payment, that's not a 3-month thing. It's not like, okay, I'm just saving for some discretionary income for 3 months. It's typically going to be over a longer time period. Helping to match helps people feel more momentum and progress, et cetera, towards that, helping them get where they want to go. But it's still going to take, a pretty meaningful period of time. And then finally, just that, not just the savings, but also reducing their debt, and getting insight, some of the financial literacy in the programs. They're really getting involved in the holistic financial lives of their residents and delivering programs and offering support to get involved there. And it's pretty neat, actually, what a few of them are doing ultimately for the holistic financial position of the residents, which of course drives a little bit of this triple win of, hey, when you're helping residents get into that kind of financial position, of course, that's more endearing to you. Those people are more likely to take care of the home and take care of the relationship that they're in. But, further, just their ability to pay rent. And when inevitably life happens and something comes up, right, they're in a much better position to be able to weather and take that and be able to, pay the rent in those kind of places when that happens. And so, maybe that's something that we'll see start to get, duplicatable, scalable, and in ways even vendors might come in to help support some of these things to do that for other providers. I thought was pretty interesting. Anything else to add before we get into resident experience and a couple of your panels and some of that?
No, I think that's a pretty good, summary. I would say, yeah, I think you hit most of the points there. So
cool. Yeah. So talking about resident experience, it was those words, resident experience. It started from the very first opening CEO panel. It was mentioned and discussed for maybe 8 minutes out of the 60. And then, multiple panels all throughout. And then there were actually a couple panels. So NRHC actually asked Thad to be featured on a panel with the Chief Commercial Officer of Progress Residential and a couple of other providers in the space who, are doing some pretty innovative things as it relates to resident experience and have some thoughts on that. I can share my notes listening in. I did catch some things. Even Thad's still teaching me things from stage. You'd think as often as we hang out, I wouldn't hear too much new, but there was some good stuff that he shared as well as the other panelists. But I think I'll have him talk more about that. You also moderated a prop tech panel and resident experience was a big part of that. So Thad, why don't you kick off from your highlights and maybe the Cliff Notes version, what people could take away?
Yeah. So I think from the technology standpoint, and obviously this, from the lens of kind of the institutional player, there's a lot of conversation around so much of this industry was built by financial oriented people. So a lot of talk about assets, yields, a lot of financial metrics that they've got down cold, but not so much around technology, resident experience, and, some of the operational things that focus on that. So I think what you're seeing, if you look at like a company like Progress, or some of you might know them as Pretium, they've hired, former CMO of Home Depot is now their CEO. They've hired executives from AT&T and McDonald's. And so you're really starting to see this transition where it went from financial oriented, maybe operational oriented to an extent, like how do we make the numbers work, to, all right, we've solved that, always work to do, but how do we actually design and kind of develop an experience that sets this product, apart from an accidental landlord. And so I think you see a lot of focus coming there. So the talk in technology, I think, a lot of legacy systems, some challenging integration. And so, saying, hey, how can we get together in a coalition and really say, maybe create a data layer to better transact, work between systems, processes, vendors. So a lot of interesting conversation around that and a big focus on, using technology to better improve things. And then I'd say on the experience side, part of it was, hey, what's the action we can take? So I think, talking about like resident credit and the financial situation, I think there's a stat of 25% of homes right now have the credit reported to the bureaus. So 75% of renters, which their biggest expense is not even factored into their financial score. So, by doing that, can you actually get people into the financial system, actually create a credit score for the first time. And so they can start to get loans and participate. And I think actually this is back to John Hope Bryant's thing. I can't remember the exact stat he shared, but there's something in the trillions of dollars of lost GDP growth that we have with people who just do not participate. If they could get in, start to loan, start to buy, that growth lifts all boats. But they're just kind of on the sidelines. And so I think a big focus there. Talking about a lot of customization, personalization. So how can you customize the resident experience? Allow people to whether it may be furniture rental or lawns, things like that that are coming in line. And something we definitely talked about was services are time well saved, but experiences are time well spent. So a lot of talk around, hey, we did this operational thing, it's creating a better experience, and in effect it is, but it's not the operational convenience that creates a better experience. It's that time that they have to live in the home, do other things that creates those experiences. But on the flip side, there's a lot of talk about if you have a bad experience, that's time not well spent. Right. And so, things like HVAC failures, or, if you're cheap on the turns, right. If a door lock's not working, you go, let's save the money. But then that's a phone call, right. And then how does that impact the team? So they're really saying, hey, how do we take the long view and really kind of invest in our properties, invest in our processes, try and really be proactive, get ahead of things. And then ultimately, so I'd say that's half of it. And the other half is how can we bring new services, new experiences, new value to the industry? Was kind of the conversation. So a lot of people, again, big conversation, and a lot of people are I'd say very bullish and excited about the industry, and think there's a lot of opportunity. So definitely was learned a lot there, and thought it was encouraging to see kind of the focus shifting there. So
yeah. I think it's amazing how much in conversations like the word assets is used, the asset, and how little the word customer, was used. And it was just a comment of like that said, hey, for a while, for a lot of the industry, the focus is how do we make this financially viable? And there's still work being done, as you mentioned there, but just a lot more of this focus going from transaction to relationships and people and emotionally connecting with customers. How do we drive a great long-term minded experience for people that's going to build a reputation? Our resident experience is our reputation as an industry, right? Is how it was characterized. And it's so funny how oftentimes it was talked about how property management software, when people say property management software, what are they talking about? Well, usually what they're talking about is Yardi or RealPage or AppFolio, or really it's the accounting, the ERP, the enterprise resource planning, these accounting systems where, again, that they're designed around how do we facilitate transactions, right, between parties in real estate and organize that, report that, et cetera, right? And so a lot of work has been done there, and that has opened up all kinds of efficiencies and possibilities. I don't think we should understate, the contribution, right, that those systems have had and what they've enabled. But is that the lens, that financial and transaction lens, is that the lens that really is going to measure the things, report the things, enable the things that are going to drive a tremendous experience and help professionals ultimately build the kind of winning experiences that are going to people will pay and stay for, And I think there was a very candid discussion, actually, very publicly from folks of, hey, they've talked to Mr. Yardi, they've talked to Anand, et cetera. And, there's a lot of focus on multifamily and the enterprise and a lot of these solutions. And, unless something pretty dramatic changes, it's not looking like, that kind of massive shift. It's going to be hard to make, for these companies. So people are looking for solutions and ways to create these kind of experiences outside of those platforms, which was interesting. The other thing I thought was fascinating, a lot of focus, and we know many of you on this call, you're fans of Lead Simple and some of these other different, it's just a lot of people are focused on workflow automation, the ability for technology to really drive efficiency throughout the process, but not take people out of the process and allow people to be able to engage more privately, almost go on offense more than just defense from an experiential standpoint and a service standpoint by driving a lot of those efficiencies through technology. And maybe you have something from the prop tech panel of something from one of your panelists or something that was shared there, Thad, that would be interesting to share with the group.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, a big conversation there was just, I think a lot of the lack of API integrations and the lack of consistency in data. So I think there's conversations around how can we create a standard data format for single family homes, that everyone kind of subscribes to, similar to gap accounting, or, like I think you guys have seen the NARPA accounting standards. Can you do that for property data in a house that allows, these dozens of softwares that are addressing different portions of the market to come together? So I think, a lot of this stuff won't happen quickly, but I think you're going to start to see some committees and stuff form that, fast forward 3 to 4 years, you might get these standards, everybody, agrees to them, and then will allow even further automation and efficiency there. I think you're seeing some cool stuff. There's a company, TaskEasy, that was on the panel. And, they've now, when they're deploying their lawn service, they've now got satellite imagery that they can validate if the job was done, right? And it's not as good as being in person and, putting your own eyes on it. But for, the cost of rolling a truck to go inspect is obviously much higher. So some pretty cool stuff in some pretty unexpected areas, like, lawn service obviously is not the most exciting business, but now you got satellite imagery coming in and creating some some efficiency and kind of just, scanning portfolios. Hey, if we spot any issues, could we recommend to go do something? And so, and then I think, there's some conversation. We had some of the smart tech folks on the panel, smart locks, smart home stuff, not smart. So, the question there was around, how do you do the balance of we want to deploy smart home technology, but what happens if, it ages or becomes obsolescent? And so some of the folks there are looking at how do we create, again, an open standard for a smart home where we can use any of the products, but, in the event that you have, a thermostat that's 10 years old, how can you make sure it's still compliant and works appropriately? So, I think you see companies like SmartRent, who are addressing this, saying, hey, we're going to have a dashboard that integrates with everything. And that's your one place to go. And you also have, folks like Rently addressing that, saying, hey, we're going to build the hardware and the firmware, we can update it live. And so definitely some interesting stuff where I'd say, like, smart home, for your own home, that investment might make sense to, you can get whatever you want. But when you have a portfolio of 500 homes, if you had 30 different systems, it's too hard to manage. So you see people at the enterprise level, I think, purpose building for single family. And it's really, some cool stuff coming online. And I'm sure a lot of you, work with one of those companies. So, or I know a lot of you. So anyways, that's I think that was it from the tech panel, the kind of relevant points, but.
Yeah. And I think we've seen smart tech. I mean, just even Ken, the CEO at TaskEasy was pretty, candid about like $100 million has been put into trying to solve that problem amongst some others that are similar to it, and just how hard it is.
Yeah.
The last 10 years to get technology right, but also service right, when the two are still, happening together at the same. And I think a lot of us have seen, a lot of people try to come into the property management space and say, we're just going to technology everything away, right, in this business, and how successful that would be. And I think we've seen a lot of people really struggle with that. But some people who have gone really focused, I think what you've seen is they've been through a lot of challenges over the last year, but the 10 years ahead, it looks pretty optimistic for technology to start to turn the corner on some pieces, of this, and ultimately parts of this to start to drive efficiency, which is critical because, again, cost of labor, cost of supplies, all these things are going up, right? So having a deflationary force of technology coming in is, hopefully going to drive a lot of value, and again, help differentiate professional property managers who don't necessarily need to fear these tools. They embracing these things, keeping an eye on them. Some of them are still early and probably not, maybe not mature yet to take the whole portfolio bet. But as they do mature, being quick to adopt those things and master those. I mean, an individual investor is not going to, really learn how to be a master of all these tools and pulling them together to build a great experience, right? And so rather than fearing these things, I think the even the people with all the resources in the world. I mean, we're talking about, these are 10-figure companies, right, that own and operate real estate. I mean, they could resource technology, they could do all these things, but they're very apt to work with, folks outsource who can do pieces of certain things. And really what they're looking at is, how do we bring this together to a coherent resident experience, a holistic resident experience, that we drive. And there's things we'll do, there's things we'll outsource, but pulling that all together, we can stack all these incremental wins and help really differentiate on resident experience, because that is who is paying rent. That is the asset, right? It's the person, and focusing on people has been a key. So Thad, we got some questions in the chat, comments. Should we?
Yeah, and I guess before we jump to those, I think the last, comment I'd have maybe is, myself, I kind of left feeling inspired and excited about the space. I think there's commitment from, both dollars and, from people that, hey, we're going to really make the single family asset class attractive. There's going to be a broad, from a PR standpoint of positioning, a lot of effort to go in. And, so I think that question of, how do you make the rental experience, so good that it drives more adoption of professional management? Something that we passionately believe is that professional experience is worth paying for, and it's actually a higher ROI. And so I just, overall, I think, the tailwinds are all kind of building, and we're continuing to move that direction. So definitely inspired, excited to continue to work on with amazing people and on products and services that help. So in terms of questions, I saw some concern about.
Let's do this. I want to start from the top. I think, Jim Smith, I'm going all the way back to yours, and then we'll come down from there. This is a quick one, practical one. Is there a ceiling on the maps? This is back when we were talking about, if a resident saves $50, the investor puts in 50. I do believe there was a ceiling on that. And so not just totally unlimited. If you put in 1,000, we'll match 1,000. But I believe it was something similar to that, $50 match $50.
That was right. It was a specific program.
Yeah.
And I think you could use it for anything, but you just, as long as you were staying in the home.
That's right. And I do believe they had to, it wasn't something like, hey, you can do this for 3 months and then move out. There was this is done. The program actually, one thing I remember, and I hope I'm representing this right, but I do think this is right, that it wasn't just like any month, if you save $50, we'll match $50. It was, if you save $50 12 months in a row, right? Then, hey, that, what would that be? $600?
Yeah.
So you save $600, we'll match that $600. And really what they want to do is incentivize the habit of saving, right? Not just events of saving sporadically, right? How do the habit of saving, right? Being able to pay rent, but also save a little bit on top of that was really what they were incentivizing, Jim. And so that's a good follow-up question for those specifics.
On the next one, I think that, Claire, your comment around, home price increases and investor cap rates. So there's actually a conversation here with a couple of the folks in the institutional side, plus the CEO of Roofstock. And they were talking about how, they've seen a big shift in the mentality from underwriting purely on yield and, cash flow to saying, and appreciation was just a nice to have. And you're seeing people rethink the formula and talking about, okay, can I just break even and, cover my costs, and then appreciation, is the benefit. So, there's definitely, some pressures there, but I think you're seeing people still find attractive opportunities, and it's really a different underwriting to an extent. Hey, is this property going to appreciate? That might be one, I'm acquiring, where before, hey, I don't care if it appreciates. It actually, it's really about the yield. So I think you might see a shift into the markets they're focused on, from that regard. And there's a lot of conversation about affordable housing. So, if you look at, and you all know this, of course, but, a house that's at $100K price point might rent for $1,000. A house that's at $1 million price point is not going to rent for $10,000. It might rent for $6,000. And so, do you start to really focus on a different asset class where you can get those kind of returns? And, what's the kind of work you can do, to improve those? And so I think, again, while maybe some of the easy pickings are going away, there's still definitely a strategy. And I think, as you think about those investor calls, definitely some stuff where you can say, hey, why don't we look at different asset types in terms of quality, or price point. And, there's still some opportunity out there.
Cool. Any other questions or comments? Feel free to drop them in the chat. We are seeing a lot of people saying experience is where they are going to differentiate. I will add that there were some third-party property managers who, that we were talking to there, just in general conversation, a few of them on panels as well. And as investors talk about cap rates, and I don't think you'd see this much in the retail investor or person who owns 1, 2, 3, 4 homes, but for folks who own maybe dozens of homes, et cetera, sophisticated investors, maybe some of you even have clients that have 50 homes or 100 homes more. The cap rate pressure and everything, right? Obviously challenging for them, and hopefully they're taking a long-term mindset of there may be a period of time here where there's some pressure there. There's going to be rent growth coming up, but they may feel some of that pressure in the short term, but long term, it's looking very good again for everybody who's in that side of the business. They're feeling good about it. So hopefully those investors are taking a long-term view versus a short-term view on that. And we are seeing some management companies for that class of investors get a little creative. When they are adding ancillary programs, whether it's resident benefit packages or other things that are creating ancillary profit streams, some of them are sharing those, directly structuring their management where they're sharing a percentage of that actually with the investor, which is interesting. In other cases, they've actually negotiated different management fees. Like maybe they've gotten a little more competitive on the management fee, help take some of the cap rate pressure off for some of those who are really feeling it, but they're taking all of the ancillary fees, to their property management company. And they're thinking again, just how do we build the model, the business model here so that it's a triple win experience for residents, investors, and the management team. And it's not just somebody taking a big sacrifice in order to, alleviate pain for somebody else and moving all the pain somewhere else. How can we solve some of these problems? Well, awesome. Listen, this was great. We can definitely give everyone a few minutes back of their Triple Wednesday. If we have any questions, we'll take them. If not, we'd love to hear your top takeaways, what you're taking away from what we shared so far today. We'd love to see that in the chat. Sam, thanks for the question. Any expectation on additional evictions with inflation going on? Ted, what did we hear about that? While you actually take some time to remember, I'll just go off the cuff. What comes off the cuff, Sam? I think a lot of these larger companies, they comment out how the CDC had their eviction moratorium at a certain point, and many of them actually put in their own non-eviction policy, predating that CDC eviction moratorium. And so I think a lot of them have really focused on, and many of you have made these same comments to us in our conversations directly of like, that eviction moratorium and not having that lever to pull forced a lot of people to communicate with residents, create payment plans with residents, and do other things and see there sometimes are other ways, and sometimes it can be painful in the short term or a period of time, but spreading out a missing month of rent over months of rent. If somebody goes jobless or a financial event like that happens and they don't have the savings ready for that kind of thing, potentially working with those residents over a period of time. That's not easy to do for every investor. Not a lot of the investors have the savings, et cetera, to weather those kind of things or see that pay out. But we are seeing, folks who are decently capitalized have a lot of, flexible programs ultimately for these residents. Something that was interesting that came out was even just straight forgiveness. I think it was $150 million of rent forgiveness from the people just at this conference was given out during the pandemic. And there's not a lot of headlines about that making it out into the media narratives. I'm not sure how sustainable that is or necessarily for everyone that's the right situation, but I didn't hear much as far as just like what people are expecting of mass evictions or foreclosures or what else?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say there was some conversation around, hey, if we go into a recession and, people lose income, it was really around, do we see a demand and application drop? Right now, it's like every property getting filled immediately, multiple applications. Do you see that soften some? But there really wasn't conversation that I recall around evictions. So.
And I think, Sam, a lot of the people here, I mean, if you look at the profile of Invitation Homes, their average household, it's $140,000 income, which I think is pretty different than your portfolio based on comments you've made in the past. Progress Residential, I think, is a little over $100,000, household income. And so there's a lot of Class A single family rental, a lot of Class B single family rental, here, and who's affected by that? maybe a little bit different.
Yeah, I was gonna say one cool thing, if you have anyone that's doing more affordable or the lower price homes.
Oh yeah.
One thing we heard from there's a group that's what they focus on, and they actually said, obviously they don't have, the same rent collection rates and certain things that some of the groups that have the 300K and up, properties do, but they actually have a program where if you pay your rent on time, get your credit score up, there's a couple very simple, but a couple bullet points like pay your rent on time, grow your credit score, that you can actually earn a discount on the rent. And so they've really seen, they're looking at, in those lower price points where you might have more activity, less rent collection. How do we actually drive that behavior up? Reward the people who do a good job, and then does the overall lift from everybody trying to do their best actually offset some of the expense for those who achieve it? And so didn't really get great metrics, but I think, an interesting thought experiment if you're starting to recommend, maybe those lower price points to investors as they're trying to grow during this period, things you can do to offset some of the extra challenges that typically are the extra expense that comes with it. So yeah, I don't think
I mean, and a lot of people were talking about, hey, if we've got, rent increases and re-rent increases into the double digits, like how long can that really go? It's like maybe there's a couple more quarters of that, a few more quarters of that, another year or two of that. But, eventually you're going to hit, you've got supply, you've got demand, but that third rail is affordability, right? And so keeping an eye on what does the income to rent ratio look like for your tenant profiles and ultimately who you're working with, is something a lot of people are keeping an eye on. And a lot of the operators, they, a 3-to-1 type of ratio is typically where they are. And so there's been room, and there still will be a little more room. But if you're closer to the 2.5, or the lower end of 3, some people are even seeing as high as a 4-to-1 ratio in their portfolios. That's the higher that ratio, maybe the more room there is. Yeah, the roommate, yes. Yeah. Other people can start. That's right. Co-living. We'll see some ways that people solve for that. So we have Atticus, who's the co-founder and CEO of PadSplit, which is taking a unique kind of co-living model to, and they're creating some really interesting yield results for their investors by, renting out a per room basis out of the homes. So you take a 4-bedroom house and it gets split up across multiple residents, and they've got a unique kind of platform for managing it. Some of these things like building residents' credit scores, et cetera, they're doing for this segment of affordable renters. Pretty interesting, different business model, and they've scaled it to a few thousand homes now in multiple markets. And so we're going to bring Atticus on and ask him some questions. We'd love to have you all on that. What's the date for that? I know it's in June 8th. Great, which I think is actually the day that our $10,000 cash contest ends. And listen, we'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to, message us offline what you learned today. We'd love to hear that. Keep stacking your triple wins. Take care, everybody. That's all for today's Triple Win Property Management Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for sharing a piece of your life with us. We do not take it for granted. I also want to give a shout out to Carol Housel for everything she and our team does to make these possible. It's crazy to think about over 5,000 professional property managers have pressed play on episodes in season 1 and season 2 now. And we really want to encourage you to keep giving feedback because more and more people are listening. It's getting better and better and better thanks to everything that you're sharing with us. If you like this enough to listen, I want to encourage you to share it with other people. You can give us feedback directly on those social media channels, Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever you're hanging out. You can also send us an email at triplewin@secondnature.com. And we just want to give more. There's no sales pitch here. Just want to offer more resources that help you find and stack your next triple win and become a triple win driven property manager. So where can you find that? You can find the private Facebook group. You can find our blog. You can find our newsletter. You can find more resources all at rbp.secondnature.com. Just search for what you're looking for there. And every time we see you, we want to see a better version of you and your business. To that end, keep it going, feel inspired, take our encouragement, and we'll see you next time.